The Women with Cat's Eyes is a scary story for kids about Mexican witches. There was a man named Panfilo who built a house in a remote Mexican village. There were two old women who lived near him, and sometimes he would go over to their house to play cards. Their names were Pilar and Fifi. They were tall, thin women with pale, narrow faces and dark circles around their eyes, as if they never slept. The two old women were sisters, and they were never apart. Wherever one of them went, the other would go too. They looked almost exactly alike, and the only way to tell them apart was by their eyes. Pilar's eyes were green and Fifi's eyes were brown. The people in the village warned him they were brujas and told him to be careful or they would put brujeria, witchcraft, on him, but he just laughed and said he wasn't afraid. He didn't believe in witches. However, as time went by, Panfilo became curious. The old women never left their house after dark. He watched their house every evening, but as soon as night fell, he never saw them come out. Sometimes, he would peer through the windows, but the house was always dark. The only thing he could see were the eyes of their cats, glittering in the darkness. The cats would hiss at him and scare him off. One night, he decided to go to their house and find out what the old sisters got up to after dark. When he peered through the window, the cats weren't around. He knocked at the door, but there was no answer, so he cautiously opened the door and went inside. The house was empty and there was a fire burning in the hearth. He was looking around when he noticed something glistening in front of the fire. When he bent down to see what it was, he recoiled in horror. There were two pairs of human eyes lying there. They looked as if they had been taken out of their sockets and left there to keep warm. There was a big iron spoon standing beside the fireplace that was used to gather up the ashes. He grabbed the spoon and scooped up the eyes to take a closer look at them. The two pairs of eyes stared up at him. One pair was green and one pair was brown. It was almost as if they were glaring at him. They made him feel sick. Panfilo was very frightened and his hands started trembling. He was shaking so much that the iron spoon tipped over and he accidentally dumped the eyes into the fire. They popped and sputtered as they hit the coals, and then they began to dance. The eyes danced up and down, hissing and popping as they jumped. He tried desperately to scoop them out of the fire, but it was too late. They were so charred and burned that they looked like four hard brown walnuts. Just then, the two lean black cats came screeching into the house. They ran around his legs, hissing at him and trying to scratch him. Panfilo was terrified. He made the sign of the cross and ran out of there as fast as his legs would carry him. He didn't stop running until he got back to the safety of his house. The next morning, he was still afraid. He was worried that the two old sisters would find out what he had done. He decided to go over to their house and talk to them as if everything was normal, hoping they wouldn't suspect him. When he knocked on the door, he heard the sisters say, "Come in, Panfilo." He opened the door and went inside. The two old women were sitting in their chairs in front of the fire, but they had their faces turned away from him. "We're busy, Panfilo," they said. "We can't play cards with you today." Panfilo saw the two lean black cats lying on the floor and they looked up at him and hissed. He noticed that they didn't have any eyes. Then, the two old women looked at him and, to his horror, he saw that they had the round eyes of the cats in the sockets where their own eyes should be. Panfilo backed away and left the house. He never saw the two old sisters after that. They stayed in that house day and night and never came out. Even so, Panfilo made sure he kept his doors and windows locked and never went outside after dark. The Black Kimono is a scary true story about a Japanese man who has a strange encounter while staying the night in his friend's house. I live in Japan and a lot of my friends have told me about their scary experiences with the supernatural. I guess the scariest one came from my friend, who used to be able to see ghosts when he was younger. One day, he wanted to meet up with a girl he had gone to school with. Her name was Asako. They arranged to meet at a popular location in Tokyo. However, when the day came, he waited there for a few hours but she never showed up. Thinking she must have forgotten about it or got the day wrong, he went home. Later that night, he called her and he found out that she was mad at him for not showing up. Apparently she had been at the meeting place at the right time, but somehow they had missed each other. Although it was strange, Tokyo is a big city and the meeting place was busy, so they laughed it off and made plans to meet at a smaller train station outside of the city. But this time, when my friend went to meet her, he ended up waiting for a few hours. He even asked the station employees to make an announcement asking Asako to come meet him at the exit, but she never showed up. Eventually, he gave up and went home. He called her again that night and she insisted that she had been waiting there at the exit like they had arranged. He told her how he had asked them to make an announcement and she said that she had heard it while she was standing right there at the exit, but no one else was around. This really creeped them out, so my friend suggested that he and his girlfriend Yukiko go to Asako's apartment to meet her that night. She agreed and my friend and Yukiko headed over right away. When they got there, everything seemed normal. They spent the night drinking and talking and having fun. They lost track of time and before they knew it, they had missed the last train home. Asako told them they could stay overnight and pulled out a futon next to her bed for them to sleep on. Somewhere around 3 a.m., my friend woke up suddenly. He was unable to move. When he opened his eyes, he saw Asako looming over him. She was sitting on his stomach. Her eyes were black and her face was pale. Her long, black hair was hanging down in his face. She was wearing a black kimono and had a strange headdress that looked like a three-pronged candlestick with burning candles. As she moved closer, her hair started to blow around in a strong wind and it caught on fire. He could feel the searing heat from her blazing hair against his face, but he still couldn't move a muscle. He began to really panic when she reached for his neck, and he tried to call out to Yukiko but his voice wouldn't work. She started squeezing his neck, all the while whispering something that he couldn't make out. Suddenly, he was able to yell out and he heard someone moving on the bed. He turned to look and it was Asako, looking sleepy and confused. He looked back up at the woman strangling him and she had disappeared. His girlfriend Yukiko was lying on the floor nearby instead. He didn't tell them what happened so they wouldn't get freaked out, but about a month or two later, he went to a traditional play with his girlfriend. One of the characters was the ghost of a vengeful woman who had been betrayed in her past life. Her goal was to hunt down the reincarnation of the man who betrayed her and kill him. She was pale with long, black hair and wore a black kimono. She also had a three-pronged candlestick headdress, and her hair would catch fire from the burning candles on there. Later on, he went to a fortune teller and asked her about it. She told him that he had betrayed a woman in his past life and that the spirit of the woman was reincarnated as Asako. When he had tried to meet up with her, his protector spirits had prevented them from seeing each other to keep him safe. However, when he went to stay in her apartment, he had trapped himself in a place where she could attack him. The fortune teller told him he was lucky to be alive. The Babysitter Story is a true scary story about a teenage girl who is babysitting 3 children one night when she receives a creepy phone call from a strange man. There was a young girl who was in need of a job was able to find work as a babysitter for a couple who lived in a large, isolated, old house. They were going out to see a movie that night and left the teenage babysitter in charge of their 3 young children. The babysitter put the children to bed when it got late and then went downstairs to watch some television. She was just getting comfortable when she heard the phone ringing. When she answered it, all she heard was heavy breathing followed by a man's voice asking, "Have you checked on the children?" Freaked out, she hung up the phone, trying to convince herself that it was just someone playing a practical joke on her. She went back to watching television, but about 15 minutes later, the phone rang again. She picked up the receiver and heard hysterical laughter from the other end of the line. Then the same voice asked, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" The babysitter slammed down the phone. The poor girl was frightened out of her wits and immediately called the police. The operator at the police station told the babysitter that if the man called again, she should try to keep him talking. That would give the police time to trace the call. A few minutes later, the phone rang a third time, and when the babysitter answered it, she heard the heavy breathing again. The voice on the line said, "You should really check on the children." The babysitter listened to him laughing hysterically for a long time. She hung up the phone again, and almost immediately, it rang again. This time it was the operator from the police station who yelled, "Get out of the house right now. The calls are coming from the upstairs phone." The babysitter dropped the phone in shock, and suddenly she heard heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. Without pausing for a second, she ran out of the house as fast as her legs would carry her. Just as she closed the front door behind her, a man's hand slammed against the glass. She screamed and ran out into the street just as a police car was pulling up outside. The police searched the house and found the two children upstairs, hiding in a closet, crying uncontrollably. In the parents' bedroom, they found a bloody axe lying on the floor next to the upstairs phone. The back window was wide open and the curtains were blowing in the breeze. There was no sign of the madman who had made the phone calls. He had escaped into the night when the police arrived and managed to interrupt his horrible plan to kill the two children and the poor babysitter.